My 30th birthday started with champagne and ended with betrayal. My parents, Linda and Robert, arrived with fake smiles and birthday cake, but I watched in real time as my phone showed $2.7 million vanishing from my savings account. My father laughed coldly, declaring the money would secure my sister Amanda's future instead. My mother dismissed my decade of sacrifice, claiming I would have wasted it anyway. But I started laughing too, because what they stole was actually bait in an elaborate trap I had spent 2 years setting specifically for this moment. Growing up in suburban Dallas, I learned early that love in the Peterson household came with conditions. While my younger sister Amanda received private dance lessons, tutoring sessions, and eventually a full ride to Northwestern University courtesy of our parents, I worked 3 jobs to pay for my state school education at University of Texas. By age 20, I had developed what you might call a healthy skepticism about family loyalty. My name is Peter Peterson, and I am a software engineer who moved to Austin after college. I had always been the responsible one, the kid who saved birthday money instead of spending it, who chose practical gifts over expensive ones. My parents seemed to interpret this responsibility as a sign that I needed less support, not more. When Amanda wanted something, it was an emergency that required immediate family intervention. When I needed something, I was told to figure it out myself because I was so capable. The wake-up call came 2 years ago during a family barbecue at my parents' house in Plano. I had driven up from Austin to celebrate my father's 62nd birthday, bringing an expensive bottle of scotch and my usual optimistic hope that maybe this time would be different. After dinner, I went inside to use the bathroom and overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. Amanda's going to need at least $2.5 million for the wedding and house down payment, my mother was saying. David's family is wealthy, and we cannot let her look poor by comparison. Peter's been saving like a maniac for 10 years, my father replied. He's got to have at least that much by now, maybe more. The boy lives like a monk. No girlfriend, no expensive hobbies, just work and saving. What's he going to do with all that money anyway? My blood ran cold as I realized they were not just discussing my finances, but planning to access them. I pressed myself against the wall and kept listening. I still have access to his savings account from when he was in college, my father continued. We never removed my name from it. Technically, I could withdraw anything I wanted. Do you think he would give it willingly if we asked? Peter's always been selfish with money. Remember how he refused to help pay for Amanda's sorority fees? We will have to be smart about this. That night I drove back to Austin with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My own parents were planning to steal my life savings to fund my sister's wedding. The account they were discussing contained every dollar I had saved since college, the result of 10 years of living below my means and investing carefully. But as the shock wore off, something else took its place. Not just anger, but a cold, calculating determination. If my parents wanted to play games with my money, I would give them a game they would never forget. I spent the next week researching everything I could about financial fraud, elder abuse laws, and family theft. What I discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Because my father's name was still on my savings account as a joint holder from my college days, any withdrawal he made would be completely legal. I had never removed his access because I trusted my family. That trust was about to become the foundation of their downfall. I developed what I called Project Honeypot. The concept was simple. If my parents wanted to steal from me, I would make it as easy as possible while documenting every step of their betrayal. Over the following months, I began transferring money from my real investment accounts into the savings account they could access. I made sure they could see the balance growing during family visits, casually mentioning my savings milestones and even showing them bank statements during dinner conversations. Look at this, I would say, pulling up my banking app. 2.2 million now. I cannot believe how much compound interest can do. My parents would exchange glances that I pretended not to notice, their eyes lighting up with something that definitely was not parental pride. Meanwhile, I was secretly recording conversations whenever I visited. Texas is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was part of. I documented dozens of discussions where my parents talked about accessing my money, including phone calls where my mother asked detailed questions about my long-term financial plans and whether I was keeping all my eggs in one basket. The most damning evidence came when I overheard my parents consulting with their attorney about parental rights to adult children's finances. They had actually paid a lawyer $200 to confirm that joint account holders could withdraw funds without permission from other account holders. They were not just planning to steal from me. They were making sure they could do it legally. By my 30th birthday, I had everything in place. The savings account contained exactly $2.7 million, the precise amount Amanda would need for her dream wedding and house down payment. My real wealth, however, was hidden in cryptocurrency wallets, offshore investment accounts, and a business partnership that my family knew nothing about. The money they planned to steal represented about 30% of my actual net worth. I had spent 2 years setting the perfect trap, and my parents were about to walk right into it. The birthday dinner took place at Romano's Italian restaurant in downtown Dallas, the same place where we had celebrated every Peterson family milestone for the past 15 years. Amanda had driven down from Chicago, where she worked as a marketing coordinator, and my parents had made reservations for 7:30 on a Saturday night. Everything seemed normal until I excused myself to check my phone and saw the banking alert that changed everything. Transaction alert. Withdrawal of $2,700,000 from savings account, ending in 4728. Available balance, $0.18. My hands started shaking, but not from shock. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. I took a deep breath, put on my best expression of confusion and panic, and walked back to the table. "Mom, Dad, something's wrong with my bank account," I said, holding up my phone. "It shows that almost $3 million just disappeared from my savings." My father did not even try to look surprised. Instead, he smiled the kind of cold smile I had never seen from him before. "That money is going to secure Amanda's future, Peter. She's getting married to a wonderful man, and they need a proper start in life." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking with perfectly practiced desperation. "That's my money. I saved that for 10 years. Technically, it's our money," my mother chimed in, not even looking up from her tiramisu. "Your father's name is on the account. We have just as much right to it as you do. But I earned that money. I worked 60-hour weeks. I lived in a studio apartment. I drove a 10-year-old car. That money represents every sacrifice I have made since college." Amanda looked uncomfortable, shifting in her chair and staring at her plate. "Mom, Dad, maybe we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," my father said firmly. "Peter has been hoarding money like a dragon sitting on gold. He's 30 years old, unmarried, no children, no responsibilities. Amanda is starting a family. She needs security. I need security too," I protested, letting my voice rise slightly. Other diners were starting to look in our direction. "That was supposed to be my house down payment, my emergency fund, my retirement savings. You would have just wasted it anyway," my mother said dismissively. "Probably on some ridiculous gadgets or a sports car. At least this way, the money is going towards something meaningful." The cruelty in her voice was stunning, but I had expected it. I had heard variations of this conversation in my recordings over the past 2 years. My parents genuinely believed that because I was single and had no children, I did not deserve financial security. They saw my savings as a family resource that they could redistribute according to their own priorities. "Amanda," I turned to my sister, letting tears form in my eyes. "Did you know about this? Did you ask them to take my money?" Amanda's face was flushed with embarrassment. "Peter, I thought you offered to help with the wedding. Mom and Dad said you wanted to contribute." "I never offered anything," I said, which was technically true. "This is the first I'm hearing about any of this." "Well, now you know," my father said, signaling the waiter for the check. "Consider it an early inheritance. Amanda gets her share now when she can use it, and you will get yours eventually. What if I never get married? What if I never have children? Do I just get nothing because I do not fit your definition of worthy?" "You'll figure it out," my mother said. "You always do. You're resourceful." The check arrived, and my father paid with a credit card while I sat there in stunned silence. Not stunned by their betrayal, which I had expected, but stunned by how easily they could dismiss 10 years of my life as worthless. They were not just stealing my money, they were stealing my dignity, my autonomy, and my trust in family bonds. "I cannot believe you are doing this to me," I said as we walked to the parking lot. "I thought family was supposed to support each other, not tear each other down." "This is support," my father replied. "We are supporting Amanda when she needs it most. You have had 30 years to figure out your life. She is just getting started." "I am calling a lawyer," I threatened. "Go ahead," my mother laughed. "Your father's name is on the account. Everything we did is completely legal." They were right, and they knew it. That afternoon, while I was getting ready for dinner, my father had walked into his local Wells Fargo branch and withdrawn $2.7 million from our joint savings account. He had the legal right to do it, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop him or get the money back through conventional legal channels. What my parents did not know was that I had documented this entire conversation on a hidden recording device, along with dozens of other conversations over the past 2 years. They also did not know that the money they had just stolen was specifically placed in that account as bait, or that I had been working with a private investigator and documentary filmmaker to expose a pattern of financial abuse that went far beyond just my savings. But the most important thing they did not know was that this was only the beginning. I had spent 2 years planning for this moment, and now that they had taken the bait, I could spring the rest of the trap. As we said goodbye in the parking lot, I played my role perfectly. I hugged my parents with tears in my eyes, thanking them for a birthday I will never forget. Amanda looked miserable, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation but not sure what to do about it. "I love you both," I told my parents. "I hope you know what you are doing." "We do," my father said confidently. "This is for the best." I drove back to Austin that night with my heart pounding, not from distress but from anticipation. My parents thought they had won, but they had actually just walked into the most elaborate financial trap I could design. The real show was about to begin. 3 days after my birthday dinner, I drove to Chicago to confront Amanda. I had told my parents I was going to beg her to return the money, which was partially true. I did plan to beg, but not for the reasons they thought. Amanda lived in a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, courtesy of her job at a prestigious marketing firm and her engagement to David, whose family owned a chain of successful restaurants throughout the Midwest. When she opened the door, I could see the guilt written all over her face. "Peter, I am so sorry," she started before I even said hello. "I never wanted this to happen, but it did happen," I replied, stepping inside and looking around at her expensive furniture and artwork. $2.7 million of my life savings is now sitting in your bank account. I know, and I feel terrible about it. But Mom and Dad said you offered to pay for the wedding as a gift. They showed me text messages where you supposedly said you wanted to help. I pulled out my phone and opened my text message history with my parents. "Amanda, look at this. Show me one text where I offered to pay for anything." She scrolled through months of messages, her face growing more confused with each screen. "These are just normal family conversations. There's nothing here about wedding expenses or financial contributions, because I never offered to pay for your wedding. I was never even asked to contribute. The first I heard about this plan was when I saw my bank account emptied at dinner." Amanda sank onto her couch, putting her head in her hands. "I do not understand. Mom and Dad have been talking about your generous offer for months. They said you were excited to help launch my marriage, and that it was your idea to cover the major expenses. Amanda, I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever asked for my money? Did you ever tell our parents that you expected me to pay for your wedding?" "Never," she said firmly. "I have my own savings, and David's family is helping too. When Mom and Dad first mentioned your offer, I actually told them it was too much. I said I did not need that kind of help." "What did they say to that?" "They said you insisted, that you had more money than you knew what to do with, and that helping family was important to you. They made it sound like I would be insulting you by refusing." I sat down across from her and pulled out my phone again. "Amanda, I want to show you something, but I need you to promise me that you will not tell our parents about this conversation." "Peter, you are scaring me." "Just promise, May." "Okay, I promise." I opened the recording app on my phone and played her one of the conversations I had captured at my father's birthday party 2 years earlier. As my parents' voices filled the room, discussing their plans to access my money and their assessment of my selfish nature, Amanda's face went completely pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They have been planning this for 2 years. It gets worse," I said, playing another recording where our parents discussed how to manipulate both of us. In this conversation, they strategized about telling Amanda that I was eager to help, while simultaneously telling me that Amanda felt entitled to family money. "They have been lying to both of us," Amanda said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "For months, they have been telling me how resentful you are about supporting family members. They said you complained constantly about being expected to help with my expenses. I never complained about anything because I was never asked to help with anything. And they told me you offered this money as a way to prove that you were not selfish. They made it seem like the whole thing was your idea." Amanda got up and walked to her kitchen, returning with her own phone. "Peter, I need to show you something too." She opened her text messages with our parents and showed me months of conversations where Linda and Robert had carefully constructed a narrative about my supposed generosity. They had sent Amanda screenshots of fake conversations, telling her I was thrilled to contribute to her future and that declining the money would hurt my feelings. "Look at this one," Amanda said, showing me a message from our mother dated 3 weeks earlier. Mom wrote, "Peter is so excited about helping with your wedding. He keeps asking if 2.7 million will be enough, or if you need more. I think this is his way of showing how much he loves you." I never said any of that. I know that now. But at the time, it made sense. You have always been successful, and you have never seemed interested in spending money on yourself. When they said you wanted to help, I believed them. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the full scope of our parents' manipulation. They had not just stolen my money, they had systematically destroyed trust between their own children by lying to both of us about the other's intentions and feelings. "Amanda, how much of that money have you spent?" "None of it. The whole amount is still sitting in a separate account. I was waiting until closer to the wedding to start using it. Peter, I will transfer it back to you right now. I never wanted your money in the first place. Actually, I want you to keep it." "What? Why?" "Because I have a plan, and I need your help to execute it. Our parents think they have successfully pitted us against each other. They think you are grateful for the money and that I am bitter about losing it. I want to keep up that pretense for a little while longer." "What kind of plan?" I told Amanda about Project Honeypot, about the recordings I had been making, and about the larger investigation I had been conducting into our parents' financial history. I explained that the $2.7 million they had stolen was actually a small fraction of my real wealth, and that I had deliberately made it available as bait to document their betrayal. "You mean you let them steal from you on purpose?" "I let them reveal their true nature on purpose. There is a difference." Amanda stared at me in amazement. "Peter, this is insane. You have been planning this for 2 years?" "I have been documenting their betrayal for 2 years. The plan is still evolving." I told her about the private investigator I had hired, and the documentary filmmaker who was interested in our case as part of a larger project on family financial abuse. I explained that our parents' theft was just the tip of the iceberg, and that there was evidence of a much larger pattern of financial manipulation targeting other family members. "Other family members? Who?" "Uncle Tom's family, for starters, and some irregularities with Grandma's estate that I am still investigating." "Grandma's estate? But that was settled years ago." "Was it? Are you sure about that?" Amanda's face went white again. "What are you saying?" "I am saying our parents have been playing financial games with family money for a lot longer than either of us realized, and I am saying it is time someone held them accountable." By the time I left Chicago that evening, Amanda and I had agreed on a plan. She would keep the money temporarily and continue letting our parents believe their manipulation had worked. Meanwhile, I would continue building my case with the help of my investigative team. For the first time in years, Amanda and I felt like actual siblings instead of competitors for parental approval. Our parents had tried to turn us against each other, but their betrayal had actually brought us closer together. That unity was about to become their biggest nightmare. 6 months before my 30th birthday, I had hired Jake Morrison, a private investigator who specialized in family financial crimes. What started as research into my parents' plans for my savings account had evolved into a comprehensive investigation of their entire financial history. What Jake discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Your parents have been systematically manipulating family finances for at least 15 years, Jake told me during a meeting at his office in downtown Austin. This is not just about your savings account. This is a pattern of behavior that has affected multiple family members. Jake spread out a collection of documents, bank records, and legal papers across his desk. Let's start with your Uncle Tom's situation. In 2008, your parents borrowed $50,000 from him, claiming they needed emergency funds for your father's medical expenses after a supposed heart attack. My father never had a heart attack, I said, studying the loan documents. Exactly. The medical emergency was completely fabricated. They used the money to pay for Amanda's private school tuition and dance lessons. When Uncle Tom asked for repayment 3 years later, they claimed the loan was actually a gift and that he was being unreasonable by asking for the money back. What happened to Uncle Tom's family? They lost their house. Tom had taken out a second mortgage to lend your parents that $50,000. When they defaulted on their own mortgage payments, the bank foreclosed. Tom's family had to move into a rental property and declare bankruptcy. I felt sick to my stomach. Uncle Tom had always been kind to Amanda and me, sending birthday cards with $20 bills and attending every school play and graduation ceremony. His daughter Sarah was 2 years older than me, and we had been close as children. I had not seen much of that side of the family in recent years, but I had assumed it was just natural growing apart. There's more, Jake continued, pulling out another set of documents. Your grandmother's estate. When she died in 2015, her will specified that her savings account and life insurance proceeds should be divided equally among all 5 grandchildren. According to probate records, the total amount was $187,000. I remember getting a check for about $20,000. Right. And so did your 3 cousins on your father's side. But Amanda received $50,000, and there is no record of where the remaining $57,000 went. It went to my parents. That's what I suspect. But it is hard to prove because your mother was the executor of the estate. She had legal authority to distribute assets, and she filed all the proper paperwork with the court. The discrepancy only becomes obvious when you add up all the distributions and compare them to the total estate value. Jake showed me bank records indicating that Linda had transferred the missing $57,000 into her own personal account just 3 days before making distributions to the grandchildren. She had essentially given herself an unauthorized inheritance, while shortchanging the other beneficiaries. Why did not anyone notice this at the time? Because your parents were trusted family members who offered to handle all the legal paperwork. Your cousins assumed they were getting their fair share, and there was no reason to question the amounts. It was only when I started digging into historical bank records that the discrepancy became clear. The investigation had uncovered what Jake called a classic pattern of financial manipulation within family systems. My parents had consistently identified family members who trusted them, created artificial financial emergencies, and then exploited that trust for personal gain. They targeted people who were either too polite to ask hard questions or too financially vulnerable to risk family conflict. The really sophisticated part, Jake explained, is how they have managed the emotional manipulation alongside the financial fraud. They do not just take money. They make their victims feel guilty for questioning the transactions. What do you mean? Think about your Uncle Tom's situation. When he asked for his $50,000 back, your parents did not just refuse to pay. They launched an emotional campaign about how hurt they were that he would prioritize money over family relationships. They made him the bad guy for wanting repayment. And it worked? It worked perfectly. Tom stopped asking for the money because he did not want to be seen as the greedy relative who broke up the family over finances. Your parents used his own decency against him. Jake had also discovered evidence that my parents had been researching my financial situation much more extensively than I had realized. They had hired their own private investigator 2 years earlier to estimate my net worth and identify all my accounts and investments. The investigator's report, which Jake had obtained through his own sources, contained detailed information about my salary, my investment portfolio, and even my spending habits. They have been planning this theft for at least 2 years, Jake said. This was not an impulsive decision or a family emergency. This was a calculated crime. The most disturbing discovery was a series of emails between my parents and Amanda's fiancé, David, discussing how to manage Peter's expectations about family financial obligations. My parents had been working behind the scenes to convince David that I should contribute significantly to the wedding expenses, framing it as a family tradition and a sign of brotherly support. They were trying to recruit your future brother-in-law as an ally in pressuring you to give up your savings voluntarily, Jake explained. When that approach did not work, they moved to Plan B, which was the direct theft. But the investigation had also uncovered something unexpected. My parents were not as financially secure as they appeared. Despite living in an expensive house and maintaining an affluent lifestyle, they were actually deep in debt. Their mortgage was underwater. They had over $100,000 in credit card debt, and they had borrowed against Robert's retirement account multiple times. Your parents are essentially running a Ponzi scheme within your own family, Jake said. They use money stolen from one family member to pay debts owed to another, while maintaining the appearance of financial stability. The most valuable part of Jake's investigation was the documentation. He had obtained bank records, legal documents, recorded phone calls, and email communications that painted a clear picture of systematic financial abuse. This evidence would be crucial for the next phase of my plan. Jake, I want to introduce you to someone, I said, pulling out my phone. His name is Marcus Chen, and he is a documentary filmmaker who specializes in white-collar crime within families. Marcus had contacted me 3 months earlier after seeing a social media post I had made about financial abuse among family members. He was working on a documentary series about gray area crimes that fell between legal technicalities and moral wrongdoing. My parents' case was exactly the kind of story he wanted to tell. The beautiful thing about your situation, Marcus had told me during our first meeting, is that you have the resources and documentation to fight back. Most victims of family financial abuse are left with no recourse because the perpetrators are careful to stay within legal boundaries. But you have been building a case. Marcus was particularly interested in the psychological aspects of family financial manipulation. He wanted to explore how trusted family members could exploit emotional bonds to commit financial crimes, and how victims could be made to feel guilty for seeking justice. Your parents' theft is legal but morally unconscionable, Marcus explained. The documentary will show how easily our legal system can be manipulated by people who understand how to exploit family relationships. Together, Jake and Marcus had helped me design a comprehensive plan to document and expose my parents' financial crimes. The theft of my savings account would be the centerpiece of the documentary, but it would also explore the broader pattern of family financial abuse that had affected multiple relatives over many years. The goal is not just to get your money back, Marcus said. The goal is to create a permanent record of their behavior that will prevent them from victimizing other family members in the future. I was ready to move to the next phase of the plan. I had the documentation, I had the expert team, and I had Amanda's cooperation. All I needed now was the perfect opportunity to spring the trap, and I knew exactly how to create it. 2 weeks after my conversation with Amanda in Chicago, I called my parents and asked them to participate in what I described as a family healing session. I told them I had been struggling with depression and anxiety since losing my savings, and that a therapist had recommended family counseling to help us work through the financial conflict together. I have been having some really dark thoughts, I told my mother over the phone, putting on my most vulnerable voice. I feel like I have lost everything that mattered to me, and I do not know how to move forward. The therapist thinks that talking through this situation with all of you might help me find some closure. Oh, honey, my mother replied, and for a moment I could almost believe she actually cared. Of course we want to help you through this. Family is the most important thing. I arranged for the session to take place at Amanda's apartment in Chicago, since it was neutral territory, and she had already agreed to help with the setup. I told my parents that Amanda had hired a family counselor named Dr. Martin Rodriguez, who specialized in financial conflicts between relatives. What my parents did not know was that Dr. Rodriguez was actually Marcus Chen, the documentary filmmaker, wearing a disguise and using a fake credentials. Amanda's apartment had been transformed into a recording studio, with hidden cameras placed throughout the living room and professional audio equipment concealed behind furniture. The night before the session, Amanda and I did a final equipment check with Marcus and his crew. Remember, Marcus told us, the key is to get them talking honestly about their motivations and their long-term plans. We need them to reveal their true attitudes toward Peter and their expectations for future financial manipulation. How do we do that? Amanda asked. Peter is going to give the performance of his life, Marcus replied. He is going to present himself as completely broken and desperate, someone who has been so psychologically damaged by their betrayal that he cannot think clearly. When people think they are dealing with someone who is mentally unstable, they often reveal their true feelings because they do not think that person can effectively fight back. The plan was for me to start the session by describing my supposed mental health crisis in detail, making my parents feel safe and confident that their manipulation had succeeded. Once they relaxed and began speaking freely, Marcus would guide the conversation toward topics that would reveal their broader patterns of financial abuse. The most important thing, Marcus explained, is to get them talking about their future plans. Do they see this as a one-time theft, or do they expect to continue accessing Peter's money throughout their retirement? Do they have similar plans for other family members? How do they justify their behavior to themselves? Saturday afternoon arrived, and my parents drove up from Dallas, looking appropriately concerned and supportive. They brought flowers for Amanda, and a card for me expressing their love and their hope that we could work through our misunderstanding together. Peter, you look terrible, my father said when he saw me, and he was not wrong. I had been deliberately sleep-depriving myself for 3 days, and had stopped shaving to create the appearance of someone in psychological crisis. I have not been sleeping much, I admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see that bank balance going to zero. 10 years of work, gone in one afternoon. Sweetheart, we need to talk about this properly, my mother said, guiding me to sit down on Amanda's couch. Dr. Rodriguez is going to help us understand each other better. Marcus entered the room wearing a conservative suit and carrying a clipboard, playing his role perfectly. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Rodriguez, and I want to thank you all for coming together during what I understand is a very difficult time for your family. We just want to help Peter get through this, my father said. We love our son, and we hate seeing him in so much pain. That is wonderful to hear, Marcus replied, sitting down across from us and pulling out a pen. Peter, why do not you start by telling us how you have been feeling since the incident with your savings account? I launched into a carefully rehearsed monologue about feeling betrayed, abandoned, and hopeless. I described sleepless nights, panic attacks, and thoughts of suicide. I talked about feeling like my life's work had been meaningless and my family relationships had been built on lies. I keep thinking about all those years I lived in that tiny apartment, eating ramen noodles and never going out with friends because I was saving every penny, I said, letting my voice crack with emotion. I thought I was building security for my future. I thought my family was proud of me for being responsible. But now I realize I was just making myself into a target. Peter, that is not fair, my mother interrupted. We are proud of you. We just think that money can do more good helping Amanda start her marriage than sitting in your account earning interest. But it was my money. I earned it. And now it is helping your sister, my father said firmly. That is what families do. We support each other. Marcus leaned forward with his pen ready. Robert, can you help me understand your perspective on this situation? How do you view the relationship between Peter's financial success and Amanda's financial needs? This was the opening we had been waiting for. My father, thinking he was talking to a neutral therapist in a safe space, began explaining his philosophy about family financial obligations with a level of honesty that was both revealing and damaging. Look, Peter has always been good with money, but he has never understood that money is meant to be used, not hoarded, my father began. He is 30 years old, no wife, no children, no real responsibilities. Amanda is getting married, starting a family, building a life. She needs that money more than he does. But do you think Peter has a right to control his own finances? Marcus asked. Of course he does. But he also has obligations to his family. When I was his age, I would have been honored to help my sister get started in life. What if Peter gets married someday? What if he wants to buy a house or start a family of his own? Then we will help him when the time comes, my mother chimed in. But right now, Amanda needs help, and Peter does not. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So you see this as a temporary redistribution of resources based on immediate need rather than a permanent transfer of wealth? Exactly, my father said. It is not like we spent the money on ourselves. Every penny went to Amanda's future. And what about Peter's future? Peter will be fine, my mother said dismissively. He always lands on his feet. He is resourceful. He is smart. He makes good money. Amanda needs more support because she is starting from a more vulnerable position. Marcus continued guiding the conversation, and my parents continued revealing their true attitudes toward me and their expectations for future financial arrangements. They talked about my obligations to help fund their retirement, their assumption that I would always be available as a financial backup for family emergencies, and their belief that my single status meant I had fewer legitimate claims on family resources. The most damaging moment came when Marcus asked about their long-term financial plans. We expect Peter to help with our healthcare costs as we get older, my mother said matter-of-factly. He is doing well professionally, and we supported his education. It is only fair that he return the favor when we need assistance. Have you discussed this expectation with Peter? We do not need to discuss it, my father replied. It is understood. Children take care of their parents. That is how families work. And what if Peter refuses to provide that support? He would not refuse, my mother said confidently. Peter is a good son, even if he can be selfish sometimes. When push comes to shove, he will do the right thing. As I listened to my parents calmly planning to use me as their personal ATM for the next 30 years, I had to work hard to maintain my facade of broken desperation. They were not just discussing the theft they had already committed. They were outlining a comprehensive plan to continue exploiting me financially for the rest of their lives. The session continued for 2 hours, with my parents becoming increasingly honest about their motivations and their future expectations. By the end, they had essentially confessed to years of financial manipulation and had outlined their plans for continued exploitation, all while believing they were helping their psychologically damaged son work through his unreasonable feelings about money. When Marcus finally ended the session, my parents hugged me with what seemed like genuine affection. I hope this was helpful, honey, my mother said. We love you so much, and we just want you to understand that everything we do is out of love. I think I am starting to understand, I replied truthfully. I was starting to understand exactly who my parents really were and what I needed to do about it. 3 days after our family therapy session, I called my parents and Amanda back to Chicago for what I told them would be a follow-up meeting with Dr. Rodriguez. I said I had been thinking about everything we discussed and wanted to share some insights about my emotional healing process. When they arrived at Amanda's apartment on Wednesday evening, they found me looking much better. I had shaved, slept well, and was wearing clean clothes for the first time in weeks. I feel like I am finally starting to process everything that happened, I told them. The therapy session really helped me gain some perspective. Oh, sweetheart, I am so glad to hear that, my mother said, giving me a hug. We were so worried about you. Dr. Rodriguez should be here any minute, I said, gesturing for them to sit down in the living room. He wants to talk about some follow-up strategies for rebuilding family trust. At exactly 7 o'clock, Marcus walked into the room, but this time he was not wearing his Dr. Rodriguez disguise. Instead, he was carrying a professional video camera and was followed by Jake Morrison, my private investigator. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, Marcus said in his normal voice. My name is Marcus Chen, and I am a documentary filmmaker. For the past 6 months, I have been working with Peter and Amanda to document your systematic pattern of family financial abuse. The color drained from my parents' faces as they realized what was happening. Peter, what is this? My father demanded. Who are these people? Mom, Dad, I want you to meet my team, I said, standing up with a calm smile. Marcus is creating a documentary about financial crimes within families, and Jake is the private investigator who has been researching your history of stealing from relatives. We have not stolen anything, my mother protested. Everything we did was legal. You are absolutely right, I replied. Taking my $2.7 million was completely legal because your name was on the account. But Jake has uncovered some other transactions that might be harder to explain. Jake stepped forward and handed my parents a thick folder of documents. Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Peterson, these are bank records, legal documents, and recorded conversations that detail your financial crimes dating back 15 years. I think you will find them very interesting. My father opened the folder and his hands started shaking as he recognized bank statements from Uncle Tom's loan, documents from my grandmother's estate, and transcripts of recorded phone calls where he and my mother discussed their plans to steal my money. "Where did you get these?" my mother whispered. "I hired Jake 2 years ago when I first overheard you planning to steal from me," I explained. "Every conversation we have had about money since then has been recorded. Every family gathering, every phone call, every text message. I have documented everything." Marcus set up his camera and began filming as I walked over to Amanda's television and connected my laptop. "Let me show you some of my favorite recordings," I said, pulling up audio files from dozens of family conversations. For the next 30 minutes, I played back my parents' own words as they discussed their plans to manipulate my finances, their justifications for stealing from family members, and their long-term strategy for using me as their retirement fund. Their voices filled the room as they callously dismissed my financial autonomy and planned how to exploit my trust. "This is entrapment," my father said desperately. "You set us up." "I documented your behavior," I corrected. "You set yourselves up by deciding to steal from your own son." Amanda, who had been quietly sitting in the corner, finally spoke up. "Mom, Dad, I have something to tell you too. I am not keeping Peter's money. I am going to use it to pay back all the family members you have stolen from over the years." "What do you mean?" my mother asked. "Uncle Tom's $50,000, plus 15 years of interest. The $57,000 you took from Grandma's estate. The money you borrowed from Aunt Jennifer and never repaid. All of it." Jake pulled out another set of documents. "We have identified 6 different family members who were victimized by your financial schemes over the past 2 decades. The total amount, including interest and penalties, comes to approximately $240,000. You cannot prove any of this in court," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, we can," Jake replied. "Your theft from the estate was a felony because you were in a position of trust as executor. The loan fraud with Uncle Tom involves forged documents and false pretenses. We have enough evidence to file criminal charges if necessary." I walked over to my parents and sat down across from them. "Mom, Dad, I want you to understand something very important. The $2.7 million you took from me represents about 30% of my actual net worth. I have been hiding the majority of my wealth in cryptocurrency, offshore accounts, and business partnerships that you know nothing about." "What are you saying?" my mother asked. "I am saying that while you were planning to steal my savings, I was building a financial fortress that you could never access. The money you took was bait in a trap designed to document your betrayal." My father stared at me in shock. "You mean you let us steal from you on purpose?" "I let you reveal your true nature on purpose. I wanted to see how far you would go, how cruel you could be, and whether you had any remorse for destroying your own son's financial security. The answer is no. You had no remorse at all." Marcus stepped closer with his camera. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, how do you feel knowing that your son spent 2 years documenting your betrayal? How does it feel to know that your greed and manipulation have been captured on camera for the world to see?" "Turn that thing off," my mother snapped. "I am afraid I cannot do that," Marcus replied. "This documentary is going to air as part of a series on financial abuse within families. Your story will help other people recognize the warning signs of family financial manipulation." Jake handed my parents another set of documents. "These are legal papers," he explained. "A lawsuit for recovery of stolen funds from multiple family members, a formal demand for repayment of fraudulent loans, and a cease and desist order preventing you from contacting Peter or Amanda for financial purposes. And this," I added, handing them a final document, "is a restraining order preventing you from accessing any of my financial accounts or attempting to manipulate my finances in any way. If you violate this order, you will face criminal charges." My parents sat in stunned silence as the reality of their situation sank in. They had thought they were stealing from a naive and trusting son who would eventually forgive them and continue funding their lifestyle. Instead, they had walked into a carefully planned trap that exposed years of financial crimes and left them facing potential criminal prosecution. "Peter," my mother said quietly, "we are your parents. How could you do this to us?" "The same way you could steal my life savings and laugh about it," I replied. "The same way you could lie to Amanda and me for months to manipulate us into fighting with each other. The same way you could steal from Uncle Tom's family and let them lose their house because of your fraud." "We love you," my father said desperately. "No, you do not," I said firmly. "You love my money. You love the idea of having a successful son who can fund your retirement. But you do not love me as a person, because people you love do not get treated the way you have treated me." Amanda stood up and walked over to our parents. "Mom, Dad, I want you to know that I am keeping Peter's money specifically to make sure you cannot access it again. I am going to use it to repair the damage you have done to our family, starting with Uncle Tom." "Amanda, please," my mother begged. "We are your family." "No," Amanda replied. "Peter is my family. You are just people who share my DNA and happen to have raised me. There is a difference." As Marcus continued filming and Jake explained the legal consequences they were facing, my parents finally began to understand that their years of financial manipulation had caught up with them. The trap was complete, and there was no way out except to face the consequences of their actions. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of a community center auditorium in Dallas, watching my parents address a room full of family members they had wronged over the years. This was not a court-ordered appearance, but rather a voluntary family meeting that Amanda and I had organized as part of our healing process. Uncle Tom sat 3 rows behind me with his wife and daughter, Sarah. They had flown in from Phoenix, where they had been living since losing their house 15 years earlier. Aunt Jennifer was there with her husband, along with several cousins I had not seen in years. Even David, Amanda's fiancé, had driven down from Chicago to show his support. The documentary had aired 2 months earlier as part of Marcus Chen's series on white-collar family crime. The episode, titled The Family ATM, had generated significant media attention and had led to new legislation in Texas protecting adults from family financial manipulation. My parents' case had become a textbook example of how trusted family members could exploit emotional bonds to commit financial crimes. More importantly for our family, the documentary had created space for healing conversations that had been impossible before. When other relatives saw the extent of Linda and Robert's manipulation, they began sharing their own stories of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. We discovered that my parents' behavior was part of an even larger pattern that had affected multiple generations of our family. "I want to start by apologizing to everyone in this room," my father said from the small stage at the front of the auditorium. His voice was shaky, and he looked like he had aged 5 years in the past 6 months. "Linda and I have spent the past several months in counseling, trying to understand how we became the kind of people who could hurt the people we love most." My mother stepped up to the microphone next to him. "We want you to know that we have sold our house and most of our possessions to make financial restitution to everyone we wronged. We know that money cannot repair the relationships we damaged, but we hope it is a first step toward earning your forgiveness." Uncle Tom stood up in the audience. "Linda, Robert, I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand something. When you took my $50,000 and then refused to pay it back, you did not just steal money. You stole my family's security, my children's college fund, and my trust in family relationships." "I know, Tom," my father replied, tears in his eyes. "We know we destroyed more than just finances. We destroyed faith." The community meeting had been Amanda's idea. After we recovered all the stolen money and my parents entered counseling, she suggested that we needed some kind of formal process for accountability and healing. The traditional legal system had been inadequate because most of my parents' crimes fell into gray areas between legal technicalities and moral wrongdoing. "I think they need to face everyone they hurt," Amanda had told me 3 months earlier. "Not in a courtroom with lawyers and judges, but in a room with the actual people whose lives they damaged. They need to see the human cost of their choices." The meeting was facilitated by Dr. Sarah Williams, a family therapist who specialized in financial trauma within family systems. She had worked with all of us individually over the past months to prepare for this conversation. "Linda and Robert," Dr. Williams said, "can you help us understand what you have learned about yourselves through this process?" My mother took a deep breath before answering. "We learned that we had convinced ourselves that we were helping our family, when really we were just taking what we wanted and finding ways to justify it. We told ourselves that Peter did not need his money as much as Amanda needed it, but the truth is we just wanted to control how family resources were distributed." "And what about the pattern of behavior that went beyond just Peter's savings?" Dr. Williams asked. "We learned that we had been manipulating family relationships for years," my father admitted. "We would create artificial emergencies, exploit people's trust, and then make them feel guilty for questioning us. We turned family loyalty into a weapon that we used against the people who trusted us most." Sarah, Uncle Tom's daughter, stood up to address my parents directly. "Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, I want you to know that losing our house when I was 16 changed the entire trajectory of my life. I could not afford to go to college because we had no savings left after the foreclosure. I have spent the past 20 years working jobs that do not require a degree, always wondering what my life might have been like if we had not lost everything." "Sarah, I am so sorry," my mother said, sobbing openly now. "We never thought about the long-term consequences of what we were doing. We just saw money as numbers on a page, not as people's dreams and security." The conversation continued for 3 hours, with family members sharing stories of how my parents' financial manipulation had affected their lives. Some stories were about direct theft, like Uncle Tom's situation. Others were about emotional manipulation, where my parents had used guilt and family obligation to pressure relatives into making financial decisions that benefited Linda and Robert at the expense of everyone else. Through it all, my parents listened without making excuses or trying to justify their behavior. The counseling they had received over the past months had helped them understand the full scope of the damage they had caused, not just financially but emotionally and relationally. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the front of the room and looked directly at my parents. "Mom, Dad, 6 months ago I thought you were just greedy. I thought you saw me as a source of money rather than a son. But I have learned through this process that the problem was deeper than greed." "What do you mean?" my father asked. "I mean you had lost the ability to see other people as fully human. When you looked at me, you saw a savings account with legs. When you looked at Uncle Tom, you saw a potential source of emergency funding. When you looked at Grandma's estate, you saw an opportunity to increase your own inheritance." I paused and looked around the room at all the relatives who had been affected by my parents' behavior. "But what you could not see was that every dollar you stole represented hours of someone's life, someone's sacrifice, someone's hopes for the future. You had reduced your own family members to financial assets in a portfolio that you thought you had the right to manage." "Peter, we love you," my mother said. "We have always loved you." "I believe that you love me," I replied. "But for years you loved your financial plans more than you loved my autonomy. You loved Amanda's wedding more than you loved my trust. You loved your own comfort more than you loved Uncle Tom's security." Dr. Williams facilitated a closing circle where each person in the room had the opportunity to express their hopes for the future of our family relationships. Some people expressed cautious optimism about rebuilding trust. Others were clear that they needed more time and evidence of change before they could consider forgiveness. Amanda stood up last. "I want everyone to know that Peter and I have used the money our parents stole to create something positive. We have established a family financial education fund that will provide scholarships and financial counseling to family members who need support. We are also working with Marcus Chen to develop educational materials that help other families recognize and prevent financial abuse." She looked directly at our parents. "Mom, Dad, I hope someday we can have a relationship built on honesty rather than manipulation. But that will depend on your actions going forward, not just your words today." As the meeting ended and family members said their goodbyes, I felt something I had not experienced in years, genuine peace about my relationship with money and family. The elaborate trap I had set for my parents had served its purpose, but the real victory was not in exposing their crimes. The real victory was in breaking the cycle of manipulation and creating space for honest relationships. Uncle Tom approached me as people were leaving. "Peter, I want you to know how grateful my family is for everything you have done. Getting that money back means Sarah can finally go back to school and finish her degree." "Uncle Tom, I am sorry it took so long for someone to stand up to them. If I had known what they did to your family, I would have acted sooner." "You could not have known because they were very good at hiding their behavior and making their victims feel ashamed. What matters is that you finally had the resources and the courage to fight back." Amanda and David walked over to join our conversation. "Peter," David said, "I want you to know that Amanda and I are postponing our wedding until we can pay for it ourselves. We do not want to start our marriage with money that came from betraying family members." "David, you do not have to do that. The money is yours now, and you should use it for whatever makes you happy. We will be happy knowing that our marriage is built on our own foundation rather than on someone else's stolen dreams," Amanda replied. As I drove back to Austin that evening, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past 2 years. Setting the trap for my parents had been satisfying, but the real transformation had come through the healing process that followed. For the first time in my adult life, I had relationships with family members that were based on honesty rather than financial obligation. The money my parents had stolen was never really the point. The point was learning to recognize manipulation, developing the courage to stand up to it, and creating space for authentic relationships. I had learned that protecting myself financially was important, but protecting myself emotionally was essential. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between being generous and being exploited. True generosity comes from a place of choice and abundance. Being exploited comes from manipulation and false obligation. My parents had convinced themselves that they were teaching me about family loyalty, but what they were really teaching me was that some people will use love as a weapon to get what they want. The trap I set for them was not really about revenge. It was about documentation, accountability, and ultimately, healing. By forcing them to confront the full scope of their behavior, we created an opportunity for genuine change rather than continued manipulation. Today, my parents live in a modest apartment and work part-time jobs to support themselves. They attend family financial abuse, recovery meetings, and volunteer with organizations that help other families heal from similar trauma. They are slowly rebuilding relationships with family members, but those relationships are now based on honesty and respect, rather than financial manipulation. Amanda and David got married 6 months later in a small, beautiful ceremony that they paid for entirely themselves. Their marriage is built on a foundation of mutual respect and financial independence, and they have become my closest allies in maintaining healthy family boundaries. As for me, I learned that wealth is not just about the money you save, but about the relationships you build and the principles you live by. The real treasure was not the millions of dollars I had accumulated, but the family bonds I was able to heal and strengthen through this process. Have you ever been in a situation where family members tried to manipulate you financially or emotionally? How did you handle it? And what did you learn about setting boundaries with people you love? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help other people find it. And if you want to see more content about family relationships and financial independence, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Finally, please share this story with anyone who might benefit from learning about financial manipulation and family boundary setting. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you build stronger, more honest relationships with the people you care about most.